It's one of the most controversial and discussed events in modern history. A single moment in time that forever changed the course of the 20th century. On November 22, 1963, President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas, Texas, an event that sent shockwaves across the United States and the world. The mystery surrounding his death has endured for over 6 decades, and it still raises questions, fuels debates, and inspires numerous conspiracy theories. Kennedy, at just 46 years old, was a beacon of hope for many Americans. Elected on an iconic wave of optimism and youth, he represented the future, a new era of leadership. But in one instant, his life was violently cut short, leaving a nation in mourning and a world grappling with the unanswered question, who was responsible for his death? Was it just one lone gunman, or was there a larger conspiracy at play? Before we dive into the details of that fateful day, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up if you want to see more content like this. Now let's take a closer look at the tragic events that unfolded that day and the mysteries that continue to surround JFK's death. The year was 1963, a time of immense political, social, and cultural upheaval. In the United States, the Cold War was at its peak, and tensions between the US and the Soviet Union were rising. The Cuban Missile Crisis had occurred just a year earlier, bringing the world to the brink of nuclear war. On the domestic front, the civil rights movement was in full swing, with African Americans demanding equality and justice, often clashing with local and state authorities. Across the globe, the effects of these conflicts were felt deeply, shaping the lives of millions. At the helm of the American government during this turbulent time was John F. Kennedy. Elected in 1960, Kennedy brought with him a sense of hope, vigor, and change. His youth and charm captivated the public, and his inaugural address inspired many with its famous line, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." The country believed in the promise of a new frontier, both in terms of policy and vision. But Kennedy's presidency was far from easy. Despite his popularity, he faced enormous challenges. The Cold War loomed large, and the escalating conflict in Vietnam was becoming more complicated by the day. Domestically, the fight for civil rights was gaining momentum, and Kennedy, despite his progressive stance, found himself in constant conflict with Southern segregationists. His decision to confront the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 was a defining moment in his presidency, and it solidified his image as a strong leader during times of extreme danger. But the lingering question remained: how would Kennedy navigate the rest of his term? The year 1963 was supposed to be a time of reconciliation for Kennedy. His administration was beginning to make strides in passing civil rights legislation, and he had plans for domestic reforms. In addition, the space race with the Soviet Union was heating up, and Kennedy's ambition to land a man on the moon seemed like an achievable goal. However, the unrelenting pressures of the Cold War and the mounting civil unrest across the country would continue to shadow him, ultimately leading to his fateful trip to Texas in November of that year. As the political tensions grew, so did the personal threats to Kennedy's life. The president had been receiving increasing threats, some more serious than others. The idea of political violence was not unheard of, but the assassination of a sitting president was almost unimaginable until it happened. On the morning of November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy set out on what was supposed to be a routine visit to Texas. The trip was meant to shore up political support for the 1964 presidential election and to mend divisions within the state's Democratic Party. Kennedy, accompanied by his wife Jacqueline, was part of a motorcade that would take them through the streets of Dallas, a city already divided in its views on his presidency. The motorcade was scheduled to pass through Dealey Plaza, a bustling downtown area. The streets were lined with excited crowds, many of whom had gathered early in the morning to get a glimpse of the young president. As the open-top limousine slowly made its way through the plaza, waving to the crowd, no one could have predicted what would transpire next. At 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade was turning from Main Street onto Dealey Plaza, 3 shots rang out. The first shot missed its mark, but the second hit Kennedy in the upper back, causing him to slump forward in his seat. Jacqueline Kennedy, seated beside her husband, would later recount that she turned to see what had happened, horrified to see the blood and the wound. The third shot struck Kennedy in the head, delivering a fatal blow. His head was thrown back violently, and within seconds the president was critically injured. The scene that followed was utter chaos. Secret Service agents in the following cars scrambled to react, and the motorcade sped toward Parkland Memorial Hospital just a few miles away. Jacqueline Kennedy, covered in her husband's blood, held his head in her lap as the car rushed to the hospital. In the confusion, the gunman had already disappeared from sight. Within minutes, police officers and detectives arrived at the scene of the shooting, but the shooter was nowhere to be found. Witnesses in Dealey Plaza had seen a man in the Texas School Book Depository building on the 6th floor, and soon Lee Harvey Oswald was named as the primary suspect. Oswald, a former Marine who had spent time in the Soviet Union, was taken into custody at a nearby movie theater shortly after the assassination. Meanwhile, at Parkland Memorial Hospital, doctors worked desperately to save the president's life. Despite their best efforts, Kennedy was declared dead at 1 p.m., just 30 minutes after the shots were fired. The nation was in shock, and the world watched as the unimaginable had become reality. The death of a sitting U.S. president was a momentous event, and no one fully understood the gravity of what had just occurred. As the news spread, the nation was left grappling with an overwhelming sense of disbelief and horror. The assassination had taken place in broad daylight, in front of hundreds of witnesses, yet the question remained, how could something like this happen? Was this just a random act of violence, or was it part of a larger conspiracy? The question of who was responsible for Kennedy's death quickly took center stage. The Dallas Police Department acted swiftly, and Oswald was arrested for the crime. He was charged with the murder of Kennedy and the murder of a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tippit, who had been shot and killed just moments after Kennedy. Despite the official arrest, the public's doubts began to grow as the investigation unfolded. In the midst of this chaos, the nation turned to Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was at the time in a car following Kennedy's motorcade. Johnson was rushed onto Air Force One at Dallas Love Field Airport, where he was sworn in as the 36th President of the United States before the plane even took off. The smooth transition of power during such a chaotic and tragic moment was a testament to the strength of the American political system, but the question that still lingered was how and why Kennedy had been assassinated. As the nation began to absorb the enormity of the loss, the FBI and other law enforcement agencies began their investigation into the events surrounding the assassination. They soon learned that Oswald had been working in the Texas School Book Depository at the time of the shooting, and that he had been seen in the building shortly before the fatal shots were fired. The gun used in the shooting was traced to a Mannlicher Carcano rifle that Oswald had purchased by mail order. However, the official narrative that Oswald had acted alone would soon be questioned by conspiracy theorists who would argue that there was much more to the story than a lone gunman in a book depository. Questions about the efficiency of the investigation, the absence of clear evidence tying Oswald directly to the assassination, and the circumstances surrounding his arrest and subsequent death began to stir doubts across the country. In the wake of the assassination, the American public and the world at large were desperate for answers. The grief was palpable, but so was the need for clarity. Who killed John F. Kennedy? Was it truly just Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone gunman with no known motive, or was there a larger conspiracy at play? To address these concerns, President Lyndon B. Johnson quickly established the Warren Commission, tasked with investigating the assassination and determining what had happened that day in Dealey Plaza. The Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, was composed of a group of prominent figures, including future President Gerald Ford and Senator John Sherman Cooper. Their primary objective was to determine whether Kennedy's death was the result of a conspiracy or the act of a single individual. The commission began its work within days of the assassination, and their report was ultimately published in September 1964, nearly a year after the event. The report concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. According to the Warren Commission, Oswald fired 3 shots from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. The first shot missed, but the second and third struck Kennedy, with the fatal shot hitting the president in the head. Oswald, according to the report, was the only person involved in the shooting, and there was no evidence of a conspiracy, either foreign or domestic. The Commission's findings were largely based on eyewitness testimonies, ballistics evidence, and the analysis of the trajectory of the bullets. However, many critics of the report raised serious questions about the thoroughness of the investigation. One of the most significant points of contention was the so-called magic bullet theory. This theory posited that a single bullet, fired by Oswald, caused multiple wounds to both President Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally, who was riding in the car with him. Critics argued that the bullet's trajectory seemed highly implausible, given the position of the 2 men in the vehicle. Despite the Commission's efforts to answer these questions, many Americans were dissatisfied with its conclusions. There were numerous reports of inconsistencies in the investigation, and the public's trust in the findings began to erode. As a result, several other investigations were launched, including one by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, in the late 1970s. The HSCA, while affirming that Oswald had fired the fatal shots, suggested that there might have been a conspiracy involved, though the evidence to support this was inconclusive. For many, the official explanation provided by the Warren Commission was simply not enough. They believed that key pieces of evidence were ignored, and they pointed to various anomalies in the investigation. The most glaring of these was the death of Oswald himself. Just 2 days after his arrest, Oswald was shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby while being transferred from one jail to another. Ruby's actions were widely viewed as suspicious, and many questioned whether Oswald's death was part of a broader cover-up. Despite the official findings, questions about the investigation and the mystery surrounding the events of November 22, 1963, only deepened. The Warren Commission's report may have officially closed the case, but it failed to put to rest the numerous doubts that had been raised. If anything, it ignited a firestorm of skepticism, and it became clear that the search for answers was far from over. Since the day of the assassination, the official story that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone has been met with skepticism and suspicion. While the Warren Commission's report laid out a clear narrative, it left many gaps that fueled conspiracy, theories about who was really responsible for President Kennedy's death. Over the years, countless theories have emerged, each suggesting a different group or individual who might have been involved in the killing. These theories range from political conspiracies to international intrigue, and they have kept the debate alive for decades. One of the most prominent conspiracy theories centers around the idea that the U.S. government, specifically elements within the CIA or the FBI, may have been involved in the assassination. According to this theory, Kennedy's foreign policies, particularly his stance on Cuba and his efforts to reduce tensions with the Soviet Union, made him a target for government agencies that saw him as weak or too conciliatory. The CIA, still reeling from the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, may have seen Kennedy as a liability, and some believe that they orchestrated his murder in order to shift American policy toward a more aggressive stance. This theory gained traction due to the increasing secrecy of government agencies during the Cold War. It is suggested that some members of the intelligence community may have had their own agenda, separate from the president's. The CIA's covert operations and its tangled relationship with Cuba, as well as the growing tensions with Soviet intelligence, have long been a point of speculation. Critics argue that Oswald's time spent in the Soviet Union and his possible ties to communist sympathizers made him an ideal scapegoat, especially if there was a larger plot at play. Another theory points to the Mafia as a potential mastermind behind the assassination. According to this line of thought, organized crime syndicates, angry over Kennedy's crackdown on them and his brother Robert's role as Attorney General, had a motive to kill the president. The Kennedy administration's aggressive stance against the Mafia had earned the family the ire of powerful mobsters, and some believe that the Mafia might have worked with other parties, including the CIA, to bring Kennedy down. One of the most cited pieces of evidence for the Mafia theory is the figure of Jack Ruby, the nightclub owner who shot and killed Lee Harvey Oswald 2 days after the assassination. Ruby, who had connections to organized crime, killed Oswald in what appeared to be an attempt to silence him before he could reveal anything about the plot. Ruby's actions have led many to speculate that he was part of a larger conspiracy to protect the true assassins and cover up the crime. The possibility of foreign involvement, particularly from Cuba or the Soviet Union, has also been a major theme in conspiracy theories. Some argue that Cuba, emboldened by the CIA's failed attempts to overthrow Fidel Castro and the ongoing conflict over the Cuban Missile Crisis, saw Kennedy as an enemy. It's believed by some that Castro's government may have wanted to retaliate against Kennedy for his role in the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. Similarly, some theorists suggest that the Soviet Union, still engaged in a bitter Cold War with the United States, may have seen Kennedy as an obstacle to their global ambitions. Although there is no direct evidence linking the Soviets to the assassination, the tensions between the two superpowers during this time were at an all-time high. The idea that the Soviet Union could have orchestrated Kennedy's death to strike a blow against American leadership is a central tenet of many conspiracy theories. Then there's the theory that there was more than one shooter involved in the assassination, which is perhaps the most popular and widely discussed conspiracy. According to this theory, there was a second gunman who fired at Kennedy from a different location. Evidence put forward by advocates of this theory includes eyewitness testimony that suggests hearing shots from more than one direction, as well as the trajectory of the bullets. Some even point to the infamous grassy knoll in Dealey Plaza, where several witnesses claim to have seen suspicious activity. The grassy knoll theory holds that a second shooter may have been stationed there, firing from behind a fence while Oswald took the fatal shot from the Texas Book Depository. The belief in a second gunman is bolstered by the so-called Zapruder film, a famous home movie of the assassination shot by Abraham Zapruder. The film shows Kennedy's head jerking backward at the moment of the fatal shot, a detail that some argue suggests a shot was fired from the front rather than from behind, as Oswald's position would have indicated. Another popular theory suggests that there were multiple groups or individuals involved in the assassination. This is the multi-conspirator theory, which posits that Kennedy's death was the result of a combination of factors involving not only the CIA, the Mafia, and foreign governments, but also individuals within the US military and other powerful institutions. The theory argues that Kennedy's death was part of a coordinated effort to maintain the status quo, particularly in relation to American military involvement in Vietnam and the interests of the military-industrial complex. Throughout the years, countless books, documentaries, and investigations have been dedicated to uncovering the truth behind JFK's death. The theories, while varying in detail and scope, all share one common theme: doubt. The official story, which places blame solely on Oswald, simply does not satisfy everyone. The mystery surrounding Kennedy's assassination has only deepened as more questions have arisen, and the evidence has been scrutinized by countless experts and amateurs alike. No matter how many investigations are conducted or how much evidence is gathered, the questions remain. Was Lee Harvey Oswald really the lone gunman? Or was there a larger conspiracy at play, with powerful individuals or groups working together to bring down one of the most beloved presidents in American history? The assassination of John F. Kennedy left a deep and lasting scar on the United States. His death sent shockwaves not just through Washington, but across the nation. The outpouring of grief was immediate, but so was the uncertainty that followed. For many, Kennedy's assassination symbolized the end of an era of hope, progress, and youthful optimism. It was as if the very fabric of the nation had been torn, leaving behind a vacuum that was difficult to fill. For the millions of Americans who had looked up to Kennedy as a symbol of strength and vision, his sudden and violent death was incomprehensible. His presidency had inspired many, especially young people, to believe in the power of public service, and the possibility of creating a better world. The Kennedy administration had also been marked by significant strides in civil rights, space exploration, and international diplomacy, and many wondered how the country would move forward without its charismatic leader. The immediate aftermath of the assassination saw the nation plunged into mourning. Across the U.S., schools, businesses, and government offices closed. The funeral procession, broadcast live on television, became an iconic moment in American history. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the streets of Washington, D.C. to pay their respects, while millions more watched from their homes. The image of Jacqueline Kennedy, standing stoically beside her husband's casket, became one of the most poignant symbols of the 1960s. Yet, amid the grief, there was also a sense of disbelief. How could such a thing happen in the United States? A country that had prided itself on its democratic values and political stability was suddenly faced with the horrifying reality that a sitting president could be assassinated in broad daylight. The event raised serious questions about the safety of elected officials and the integrity of the political system itself. Kennedy's death also had a profound effect on the political landscape of the U.S. His assassination propelled Lyndon B. Johnson into the presidency. Johnson, who had been Kennedy's vice president, was sworn in aboard Air Force One just hours after the assassination. His ascension to the presidency was not without its challenges, however. While Johnson quickly moved to carry out Kennedy's domestic agenda, such as pushing for civil rights legislation and expanding social programs, the political climate had changed. Johnson's presidency, in many ways, was marked by the shadow of Kennedy's legacy. In the years that followed, the loss of JFK had a significant impact on the political direction of the country. The hope and optimism associated with his leadership were replaced by a sense of disillusionment. The social and political upheavals of the 1960s, including the escalating war in Vietnam, growing civil rights struggles, and widespread protests, created a turbulent environment. Kennedy's death seemed to signal the end of the idealistic vision he had represented. Moreover, the assassination left a deep psychological scar on the American collective memory. It became one of the defining moments of the 20th century, shaping the national consciousness and influencing the political and cultural climate for decades. Theories and speculations about the true nature of Kennedy's death continued to flourish, leaving Americans grappling with a sense of unease and distrust in their government. For many, the assassination marked the end of a period of hope and a shift toward a more cynical and divided political era. The 1960s became a decade defined by turmoil and division, from the civil rights movement to the protests against the Vietnam War. JFK's death cast a long shadow over the subsequent years, with his vision of a better, more unified America left unfulfilled. Despite this, Kennedy's legacy continued to inspire future generations. His commitment to public service, his eloquent speeches, and his vision for a better world were remembered long after his death. The enduring image of Kennedy as a man who believed in the power of government to make a difference in the lives of everyday people became a touchstone for later political leaders. The ideals he championed, such as space exploration, civil rights, and global diplomacy, lived on in the policies and actions of his successors. However, the emotional impact of his death continued to linger. For many, the sense of loss never fully went away, and the unanswered questions surrounding the assassination only added to the feeling that something vital had been taken away from the country. The legacy of John F. Kennedy endures, but so does the mystery surrounding his death. Over half a century has passed since that tragic day in Dealey Plaza, and while time has allowed for reflection on his life and achievements, the unanswered questions about his assassination still haunt the American public. These questions, coupled with the continued fascination with his presidency, have led to a curious paradox. Kennedy's legacy is as much shaped by his tragic death as it is by the accomplishments of his life. Kennedy's political and cultural impact is undeniable. During his presidency, he inspired a sense of hope and optimism, especially through his efforts to address civil rights, space exploration, and the Cold War. His famous inaugural address, in which he urged Americans to "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," has remained an iconic call to action, encouraging civic engagement and selflessness. His leadership in the early days of the Vietnam War, his handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and his push for landmark civil rights legislation cemented his place as one of America's most beloved presidents. The Apollo space program, which Kennedy championed, ultimately led to the United States landing a man on the moon in 1969, a victory that was as much a testament to his vision as it was to American ingenuity. Yet, despite these accomplishments, Kennedy's presidency remains inseparable from the tragic circumstances of his death. His assassination set in motion a series of events that irrevocably altered the nation. While his legacy of inspiring hope and striving for a better future remains intact, the manner of his death raised fundamental questions about political violence, the safety of public figures, and the stability of democratic institutions. Theories surrounding Kennedy's assassination have persisted for decades, with new books, documentaries, and investigations continuing to emerge. Each new wave of inquiry brings forth more doubt, more suspicions, and more attempts to uncover the truth behind his death. The release of classified documents over the years has not necessarily solved the mystery, but instead fueled further debate, leading some to wonder if we will ever truly know what happened on that fateful day in Dallas. One of the most enduring questions is whether Kennedy's assassination was the work of a lone gunman, or whether a conspiracy was involved. The release of government documents, including files related to the CIA, the FBI, and the Warren Commission's investigation, has only complicated matters. For example, the long secret records surrounding the CIA's covert operations in Cuba, as well as its relationship with anti-Castro Cuban exiles, have led many to theorize that these elements may have played a role in the assassination. The U.S. government's lack of transparency has fueled speculation, with some arguing that the truth was deliberately hidden for political reasons. Moreover, the fact that Kennedy's suspected assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, was murdered by Jack Ruby before he could stand trial has added another layer of intrigue. Oswald's death has often been seen as a deliberate attempt to silence him before he could testify or reveal critical information. Jack Ruby's own motivations remain a subject of debate. Some view him as a patriotic individual taking justice into his own hands, while others suggest that he was part of a larger conspiracy to eliminate Oswald and keep key secrets hidden. Despite all the evidence gathered over the years, the reality is that the American public has never fully accepted the official explanation of the assassination. Polls conducted over the decades reveal that a significant portion of the population believes there was more to the story than the government has let on. These suspicions have led to a deep mistrust of official narratives and governmental investigations, making Kennedy's assassination a pivotal moment in shaping the American psyche in the second half of the 20th century. The ongoing interest in Kennedy's death and the resulting conspiracy theories reflect broader societal issues as well. They point to a pervasive sense of distrust in government, a feeling that the powers that be may be hiding the truth from the public. This mistrust has been amplified by other political events in American history: Watergate, the Iran-Contra scandal, and more recently, the controversies surrounding the 2000 presidential election and the events of 9/11, where government secrecy and cover-ups have led to public disillusionment. While the questions about Kennedy's assassination may never be definitively answered, it is clear that the intrigue surrounding his death will continue for the foreseeable future. His presidency, marked by its promise of progress and change, still inspires politicians, scholars, and ordinary citizens alike. His vision for America, a nation dedicated to freedom, equality, and global cooperation, remains a guiding light for many, even as doubts persist about the forces that took his life. In the end, John F. Kennedy's death became an inseparable part of his life and legacy. His tragic assassination represents a watershed moment in American history, one that has shaped not just the political landscape of the time, but the way future generations view the complexities of power, leadership, and justice. The mystery of his death may never be fully solved, but his vision for a better America, one of hope, ambition, and unity, continues to inspire those who dare to dream of a brighter future.